My friends, today we gather at a moment when history itself seems to bend toward the unexpected. A nation once regarded as a developing voice, a nation once dismissed as secondary in the great halls of global power, has now stepped forward to do something no other country dared. India, with courage rooted in its heritage and conviction rooted in its future, has taken an action that has left the world, yes, even America, astonished. What we are witnessing is not merely a geopolitical maneuver. It is not just another headline in a cycle of breaking news. It is a statement, a declaration, and a turning point that forces the world to look again at the balance of power, the meaning of sovereignty, and the shape of tomorrow. My friends, when we talk about sovereignty, we are not speaking of something abstract, something confined to textbooks or diplomatic summits. Sovereignty is the living soul of a nation. It is the idea that people, bound together by history and hope, have the right to govern themselves, to make their own choices, to determine their own path, without bending under the weight of outside pressure. And yet, for decades, sovereignty has often been spoken about as if it belongs only to those who already hold the greatest power. Too often, it has been the privilege of the mighty, while the rest are told to accept limits. But today, in a moment that will echo far beyond its borders, India has dared to take sovereignty out of the pages of theory and into the arena of action. And in doing so, it has reminded the world that sovereignty is not just a word, it is a force. Think about the courage it takes to stand up when the world expects you to stay seated. Think about the weight of global pressure, the phone calls from powerful leaders, the warnings whispered behind closed doors, the predictions of disaster. If you choose a path that does not conform, every nation has faced such pressures at some point. But very few have had the will to resist them. Very few have looked at the storm on the horizon and still chosen to walk forward. India has done that. And in doing so, it has broken the illusion that sovereignty is fragile, that sovereignty must bow before the so-called international order. No, sovereignty, when embraced with courage, has the ability to reshape that order entirely. Now, I know some will ask, what exactly makes this moment so different? Haven't other nations spoken of independence before? Haven't we heard leaders declare that they will protect their sovereignty? And yes, we have. But what makes India's act unique is that it did more than talk. It acted. And it acted at a time when silence would have been safer, when caution would have been easier, when compromise would have been more comfortable. Instead, it chose conviction. And that makes all the difference. Because the world is not changed by rhetoric alone. It is changed by deeds that others did not believe were possible. To understand the depth of this, we must remember the environment in which this decision was made. The global stage today is crowded with uncertainty. Old alliances are fraying, new rivalries are emerging, and the balance of power is shifting. In such a time, most nations seek shelter. They try to avoid standing out, avoid drawing attention, avoid provoking the anger of the powerful. That is the safe path, the predictable path, but sovereignty is not truly tested when things are easy. Sovereignty is tested when the costs are high, when the risks are real, when the voices around you say, "Don't do it, you will regret it." That is when sovereignty matters most. And that is the test India has just passed. What India did, it did not just for itself, but for the idea that nations have a right to self-determination without apology. By exercising its sovereignty so openly, so decisively, India forced the world to confront a question many would rather avoid. Are we living in a global order built on equality, or one built on coercion? If a nation cannot take a stand without being punished, can we truly say sovereignty exists at all? India's decision has pulled back the curtain. It has revealed the double standards, the hierarchies, the subtle forms of intimidation that have too often been accepted as normal. And by challenging that normal, India has created space for a new conversation, one that will reverberate across continents. Now, this is not to say that sovereignty means isolation. It is not about building walls or turning away from the world. It is about engaging with the world on equal terms, not as a subordinate, but as a partner. India has long been a part of the international community, contributing to peacekeeping, to science, to trade, to culture. But too often, it has been expected to play a role assigned by others, to stay within boundaries drawn by powers with louder voices. Today, India stepped outside those boundaries. It said, "We are not simply participants, we are authors. We do not follow the script, we write it." And that message carries weight far beyond New Delhi. There will be those who dismiss this act, who try to minimize it, who will say it is a gamble, a mistake, a reckless move. But history teaches us something important. Every nation that has risen to leadership has faced that same chorus of doubt. When America declared independence, it was told it would be crushed. When colonized nations across Africa and Asia declared their freedom, they were told they could not survive. When small states challenged empires, they were told they would be forgotten. And yet, time and again, those who chose sovereignty, who chose courage, became the ones who reshaped the future. India is now carrying that torch forward in the 21st century. And let us not underestimate the ripple effect. Sovereignty, when defended with courage, is contagious. Other nations see it, and they take heart. Leaders who once felt isolated begin to imagine new possibilities. Citizens who once felt powerless begin to demand dignity. A single act of defiance against unjust pressure can awaken the spirit of an entire region. Already from Africa to Latin America, voices are rising, inspired by what India has just done. They are asking if India can withstand the weight of the world's most powerful players. Why not us? Why not now? And that is how global order shifts, not through sudden collapse, but through steady acts of courage that create new realities no one can ignore. But let us also be clear, courage does not erase consequences. India will face challenges. It may face sanctions, criticism, attempts to isolate it. That is the price every nation pays for standing firm. But here is the truth. Nations are not remembered for the ease of their choices. They are remembered for the strength of them. And the strength of India's choice will outlast whatever temporary storms it must weather, because the world respects courage, even when it pretends to be shocked by it. Even America, surprised though it may be, must now reckon with the fact that India has shifted the conversation, and that shift cannot be undone. This moment also tells us something about leadership. Too often we imagine leadership as something that comes only from power, military might, economic clout, technological dominance. But leadership, real leadership, is about example. It is about taking a step that others are afraid to take, and in doing so, showing them that they too are capable. India's act of sovereignty is leadership by example. It is not leadership by force, not leadership by domination, but leadership by courage. And in the long arc of history, that is the kind of leadership that endures. For the people of India, this is not simply a diplomatic maneuver. It is a reaffirmation of identity. It is a reminder that their nation is not defined by others' expectations, but by their own aspirations. It tells every child growing up in Mumbai, in Delhi, in the villages and towns, that their country is not just a participant in the world, it is a leader. And that pride, that sense of dignity, will fuel a new generation to dream bigger, to aim higher, to believe that they too can stand tall on the global stage. And for the rest of the world, it is a call to reflection. It asks us, what does sovereignty mean to us? Do we defend it only when it suits our interests, or do we believe in it as a universal principle? Do we respect it only when exercised by the powerful, or do we honor it when exercised by those who challenge the powerful? These are the questions India's decision has placed at the center of global debate, and they are questions we cannot avoid. My friends, sovereignty is not static. It is not something you declare once and then forget. It must be renewed, defended, lived out in action, especially when the stakes are highest. India has done that. It has taken sovereignty from the realm of theory into the realm of reality. And in doing so, it has not only reshaped its own destiny, but also altered the course of global politics. This is why the world is shocked. This is why even America, long accustomed to setting the rules, must now pause and reconsider. Because sovereignty, when exercised with courage, has the power to remind the world that no empire, no alliance, no superpower is greater than the will of a free people. And that, above all, is the lesson of this moment. Sovereignty is not given, it is not granted, it is claimed, it is defended, and when a nation has the courage to do so, it can change the world. When we talk about leadership, for much of modern history, we have equated it with dominance. The nation with the largest armies, the most advanced weapons, the deepest financial reserves, or the widest network of allies. That was the nation that dictated the course of events. That was the country that others were expected to follow. And for decades, the world became used to this model. Superpowers led, smaller nations followed. Orders flowed from the top down, and global politics became a hierarchy rather than a dialogue. But what India has done today shatters that old perception. It reminds us that leadership in the 21st century does not have to be rooted in dominance. It can be rooted in values. It can be rooted in the power of example rather than the example of power. And that realization opens the door to a multipolar world that many had spoken about, but few truly believed was possible. Consider for a moment what leadership by dominance has meant. It has meant interventions carried out without consent. It has meant economic sanctions imposed not to protect justice, but to reinforce influence. It has meant smaller nations pressured to sign deals they did not want, to vote in ways that did not reflect their will, to align their policies not with their people, but with the preferences of others. That has been the order of things for a long time. And in such a system, sovereignty becomes conditional. Your independence exists only so long as it does not conflict with the desires of the powerful. That is not true sovereignty. That is permission, and permission is not freedom. What India has done now breaks from that cycle. It has said, in effect, leadership in this new century will not be determined solely by military strength or economic weight. It will be determined by the ability to inspire others through courage, through conviction, through consistency. By refusing to conform to pressures that even other strong nations hesitated to resist, India has shown that a country can rise not by dictating to others, but by staying true to its own values, and that has resonance far beyond its borders. Around the world, nations are watching. In Africa, where countries have too often been treated as markets rather than partners, leaders are asking whether they too can assert themselves more boldly. In Latin America, where sovereignty has often been undermined by the shadows of larger neighbors, citizens are wondering if their countries might step forward with greater independence. In Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, in smaller nations across the globe, India's courage is being studied, debated, and admired, not because it was an act of dominance, but because it was an act of dignity. And here's the truth: dignity travels farther than dominance ever will. Dominance breeds resentment. It creates compliance in the short term, but resistance in the long term. But dignity inspires. Dignity calls others to stand taller, to lift their heads higher, to believe in themselves more deeply. That is why India's action is not just a national choice, but a global signal. It is proof that in this multipolar world we are entering, the nations that rise will be those that inspire, not those that intimidate. Now, let us not pretend that this shift is easy. Multipolarity brings with it a kind of uncertainty. It means that there is no single center of power. There are many voices, many centers, many poles of influence. For those who are used to leading alone, this feels unsettling. For those who are used to following, it feels confusing. But this complexity is also an opportunity. Because in a multipolar world, no single nation can impose its will without question. In a multipolar world, cooperation is no longer a choice. It is a necessity. And that necessity creates room for nations that had long been sidelined to now contribute meaningfully to the global agenda. India's step into this role is therefore not just a matter of pride for itself. It is an invitation to others. It is saying, you too can shape the conversation. You too can have a voice that matters. You too can lead by example, not by subservience. And in this way, India is modeling a new kind of leadership that can be replicated, that can be multiplied, until the architecture of international relations looks entirely different from what we have known. Think about how transformative that is. For centuries, nations rose and fell based on empires. One dominated, then another. Rome gave way to others. Colonial Europe gave way to America and the Soviet Union, and later to a unipolar moment dominated by the United States. Each cycle reinforced the same principle: dominance equals leadership. But now, for the first time, a major power has openly demonstrated that leadership can come not from domination, but from the courage to resist it. That is a profound shift. It marks the beginning of a new chapter in global history, one where power is not concentrated in a single fist, but distributed among many hands. And here's why that matters. When leadership is based on values rather than dominance, the benefits extend to ordinary people in ways dominance never allowed. Under dominance, the global system serves the few. Under values-driven leadership, the system has the potential to serve the many. Imagine trade agreements shaped not by coercion but by fairness. Imagine climate commitments driven not by pressure, but by genuine responsibility. Imagine technology shared not as a tool of control, but as a platform for empowerment. These are the possibilities that a multipolar, values-based world begins to unlock, and India's example is the catalyst. Of course, there will be challenges. Those who built their influence on dominance will not surrender it easily. They will resist. They will attempt to undermine this new model. They may use their economic strength or military alliances to try and punish those who deviate. But history shows us that once an idea has taken root, it is hard to contain. The idea of multipolarity, the idea of values-based leadership, is now out in the open. It has been demonstrated. It has been embodied. And because of that, it cannot be undone. The very shock felt by America and others is proof of how powerful this moment is. Shock means the unexpected has occurred. Shock means the script has been broken. Shock means the assumptions of the powerful have been overturned. And when shock is followed by reflection, it often leads to change. The world is now reflecting, whether it admits it or not. Leaders are recalculating. Citizens are reimagining. Movements are forming. And all of it traces back to one country deciding to act with conviction. Let us also recognize the deeper cultural dimension of this. India's leadership by values is not accidental. It flows from a civilization with thousands of years of history, with traditions rooted in dialogue, philosophy, and resilience. A civilization that has endured conquest, colonialism, and yet emerged with its identity intact. That depth of history gives India the capacity to think differently about leadership, to imagine it not as a zero-sum game of domination, but as a collective act of inspiration. That is why India can take this stand today, and why its message resonates so widely. And so, my friends, what we are witnessing is not just a geopolitical maneuver. It is a redefinition of leadership itself. It is a transition from a world where a few dominate to a world where many participate, from a world where power was hoarded to a world where power is shared, from a world where nations rose by fear to a world where nations